Kakalosh Boker Tov, Shavua Tov. We're continuing on Daf Yomi Amud Aleph 36a1. Right, we were in the Shita of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says that any sur chal lisur, which means one prohibition does not follow another prohibition, and therefore he says Alchen Nevela B'Yom Kippurim is going to be patur. If somebody's going to eat a nevela on Kippur, is going to be exempt. So Ravina is going to come and he's going to actually answer up the Braita and say like this. Remember, to come and state that the Braita is only in accordance to Rabbi Shimon is a little bit dochak, which means it's a little bit how do you say dochak? Like it's not the best, meaning it's like you're pushing yourself against the wall. Right? So Ravina comes and he says it's even according to the rabbis. Afilu Tema Rabbanan, even if you're going to say it's according to the rabbis, that they argue on Rabbi Shimon, and they hold that there is such a concept of an isur chal isur, tevel, right, which could become chametz. There's a problem of chametz, right? And therefore he comes and he says, Mishi isuro mishum bal tochal chametz bilvad, yatsa zeh shen isuro mishum bal tochal chametz bilvad, af mishum bal tochal tevel, which means like this. According to them, they want to come and they want to say like this. In Achanami, that for sure that there's a concept of bal tuchal chametz, and which means that you're not allowed to eat chametz, and anything which could become chametz, you have the mitzvah of eating matzah, which means the chametz and the matzah are very connected. How are they connected? Only something which could become chametz, you could actually eat it as matzah. Okay, that's what we're saying. However, though, Kam Chachamim, though, and they say, is that it has to be by itself, exclusively. It cannot be with any additional things, meaning it's exclusivity. You know, some people nowadays, they love a lot of things exclusivity. They don't like, no. It's either me or nothing. That's the way it is, right? It's either all in, you get me, or if not, go get another 20. But I'm not involved. Yeah, that's what some people hold. Yeah. So he comes, he says over here, Yatsa sheni surah mishum bal tochal chametz bilvad, ela af mishum bal tochal tevel, but also because of bal tochal tevel. So says the Gemara, mide bilvad ketif. Is the pasuk coming and teaching us this concept of that there's like it's by itself, which means, right? That's what he says over here. Does it say that it's only the yisur of chametz? That means you could only have the matzah, which is only with the yisur of chametz. And la machvarta keder Rav Sheshet. But rather, the Gemara says it's much better to say like Rav Sheshet, which means like this. Each one of them had a little bit of a dochak. The little bit of the dochak of Rav Sheshet is that you're putting that the braita has to go according to Rabbi Shimon. So now we don't always like to do that, but we prefer that it goes according to everybody. But mitzat sheni, Ravina came and he gave another answer. What was his answer? Exclusivity. So the Gemara asked, does it say anywhere there in the Torah that it has to be bilvad? Does it say anywhere in the Torah that it has to be? Is there any hint of it that it has to be exclusively only the yisur of bal tochal chametz and not the yisur of bal tochal tevel as well? So because of that, they just said they prefer answering like Rav Sheshet. That means even though it was a little bit pressing, right, and it wasn't the best answer that it's only going to Rabbi Shimon, they preferred that answer. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan, we learned on a Braita. Can I be yotzei chova with matzah that was made out of maaser sheni in Yerushalayim? Can I do that or not?
I think so.
Right?
In Jerusalem, you can.
In Jerusalem, remember, maaser sheni is the second 10% after you already took off the truma gdola. Truma gdola goes to the Kohen. Afterwards, what do you take off? Maaser rishon. Maaser rishon goes to the Levi. How much is that? 10%. Truma was 1/50th. Yeah. Afterwards, the Levi takes off Trumat Maaser, 1/10 of what he took off, what the Levi took off. The Levi he takes off, and he gives 1/10 to who? To the Kohen. And then you take off Maaser Sheni on years 1, 2, 4, 5, or Maaser Ani on years 3 and 6. Maaser Ani goes to the Maaser Ani goes to the poor people. Maaser Sheni, you have to take it to Jerusalem. If you take the same fruits to Yerushalayim and you eat it within the walls, you don't have to do anything. But if you want to redeem them, because obviously you only go for Shalosh Regalim. So if you're only going to go Shalosh Regalim and you want to redeem it, so what do you have to do? You redeem it with the money, and then you have to add a fifth.
You redeem it outside.
Yeah, you redeem it outside of Yerushalayim, right? And then you add a fifth. You take the money to Yerushalayim, and there you buy the different things. So the question is, am I going to be Tzedek Chovah with Maaser Sheni in Yerushalayim? Right, with this matzah, but it's coming from Maaser Sheni. So says the Gemara Talmud Lomar, comes the Torah and says lechem oni. What does it mean lechem oni? We are going to make a drasha that even though it's written lechem oni with the aniut with an ayin, we are going to read it with an aleph with aninut with an aleph. What does that mean? Mashenechal ba'aninut, right? Something which is matzah, which is permitted to eat when a person's an onen. Remember, an onen is somebody that passes away, right? So therefore, their family members become onenim. They become an onen, which means that they're not avelim yet. They're not in the avelut process yet, but they're an onen. They're in the limbo because they didn't bury the deceased, so therefore they're in the middle. Okay, it's called aninut, onen. So yatsa zeh she'eno nechal ba'aninut. So this comes to exclude something which is not eaten ba'aninut, ela besimcha, only besimcha, which means a person that's an onen is not allowed to eat maaser sheni. Okay, and therefore, according to Shitat, these are the words of Rabbi Yosef Galilei. So therefore, just like you cannot eat maaser sheni because, right, you cannot eat maaser sheni because maaser sheni has to be besimcha. You're going to Yerushalayim, you're eating it inside of the walls of Yerushalayim. It has to be with happiness.
This is poor man's
right?
bread.
And this is poor man's bread. So obviously you can't have the poor man's bread. You can't have.
Going to bomb him out. Watch.
Rabbi Akiva comes, right? And Rabbi Akiva says, matzot riba. What does that mean? The Torah again comes and says a few different times the word matzah. It says matzot. So the fact that it adds in, it's coming to include something. What is it coming to include? Im ken, if so it's coming to include obviously maaser sheni. So says the Gemara, Im ken, if so, so what's it coming to exclude when it says, what's it coming to teach us lechemoni? Lechemoni, a poor man's bread, is not talking about where you're eating it, right? It's what you're eating with, which means ingredients. And this is what we spoke about also before. That's why it's called matzah ashira. The matzah, which is basically, egg matzah or all the chocolate matzah, all these things, it's called matzah ashira. Why is it a rich man's bread? Because poor people, they don't have the oil or the honey or the wine to start kneading the dough and making matzah with it. They only have water. Poor men only have water. So therefore, because of that, when it's called lechem oni, it only refers to the what? The bread with regular water. Matzah shira, any type of matzah which has any other type of liquid, whether it's apple juice or whatever it is that's kneaded with it, that's called matzah shira. So therefore, lechem oni comes to exclude that, and that's why you're not going to chovah with lechem oni, with matzah shira on Pesach. So, for example, if somebody comes on the night of the Seder and then he takes a nice egg matzah and he says, "This is my kazait of matzah for the night of Pesach," he's not yitzeh chovah. Why? It's matzah shira. It's not lechem oni. It has to be lechem oni. Okay? Only if he's gluten free. If he's gluten free anyway, he's not going to be zohra. Unless it's made out of oats. Oats matzah is the only one which you could do it.
It's only $40 a pound. Ridiculous.
Fine. My tamad Rabbi Akiva. Yeah. What is the reasoning of Rabbi Akiva? The reasoning of Rabbi Akiva is it says Miketiv is a written lechem oni, right? It says is it written lechem oni with a vav? It says oni ketiv without a vav, which means if it was oni with a vav, so then you could say oni milashon aninut, right? But now that it's written oni without a vav, so then it's not because of aninut, but rather aniyut, like an ani. It's not oninut, right? Aninut. So therefore, that's the difference. Rabbi Yosef Galilei says, Rabbi Yosef Galilei, mi karinan ani. You don't read it ani. It doesn't say anywhere you have to eat the lechem ani. It says lechem oni karinan. So since you read it that way, that means even though it's not written that way, the fact that it's read that way, I could add in and say, okay, so it's aninut. Okay? Rabbi Akiva, and according to Rabbi Akiva, hayde karin be'oni. Why are you reading it be'emet oni instead of ani? Lechem ani. You should have said it lechem ani. Why is it written lechem oni? Kidei Shmuel, like Shmuel. The Amar Shmuel, but Shmuel says lechem oni. Lechem she'oni malav dvarim arbe. The reason why we actually say it's oni is not because it's only. It doesn't only mean. What's it when in English when it means two different meanings? Kanan?
I don't know what the word is.
I forgot the word. Okay, right.
It has two different meanings.
Yeah, which means that when you have a word, which the same word has two different meanings, right? But it's read the same, right?
In French, it's polysemic. Polysemic, yes. More different meanings.
Okay, very good. No. Synonym means it's a different word, but that it means the same meaning. Here we're talking about that it sounds the same, right? A word.
No, I don't know the word.
In French, it's called homonym.
Yes, synonym and anonym. Anonym is the one word.
Here it is. It says here, yeah, homonyms. Homonyms, that's the word. Homonyms are words that sound alike but have different meanings. Okay, so this is a shiur also on English, yeah? Okay, so we're teaching everyone English here.
Answer or declare.
Yeah? So, yeah, hopefully, Be'ezrat Hashem, hopefully we'll graduate also. After with the Daf Yomi, we'll graduate English as well. So basically what happens is that the homonyms is that it sounds the same, but with a different meaning. So oni could either mean oni, aniyut, Or he says, oni means milashon la'anot. You're answering. Onin, she'onim alav dvarim arbe, which means that we're going to answer a lot of things on it, which means, right, matzah zo she'anachnu omrim, but it's a Haggadah. The entire Hallel, Haggadah, we're saying it on the matzot. So because of that, that's why it says lechem oni. Lechem oni because it's bread, not of aniyut, of affliction, but rather of she'onim alav, that we're going to answer on it many, many different things. Okay? V'sava Rabbi Akiva, says Rabbi Akiva, Yisa shenilo shabiyam v'derech shem nuvash. Lo, is Rabbi Akiva actually going to hold that any type of a dough which is needed with wine, oil, and honey, you're not going to be tzechovah on Pesach? Right? V'atanya, we learned in the Braita, en lashin yisa b'Pesach b'yayin v'shem nudvash. You're not allowed to come and knead on Pesach with wine, olive, oil and honey. But if you did do it, Rabbi Gamliel says, tisaref miyad, you have to burn it immediately. Chachamim omrim te'achel. Chachamim say you could eat it. There's no problem. Because according to them, you could make sure that it's on. Rabbi Akiva says, Rabbi Akiva, Shabbati aita etzel Rabbi Yezer Rabbi Yoshua. Yeah, it says over here, I was by, right, my rabbis, Rabbi Yezer and Rabbi Yoshua. Yeah, his rabbis, that I was them by Pesach. And I went and I made for them matzah, which was made with wine, oil, and honey. And they didn't tell me anything.
Wow.
And says the Braita, now even though we don't do this, mekatfim bo, right? You're still allowed to come and you're allowed to do this, which means that you're allowed to put the isa after you already made the dough. You're allowed to put this on the isa, which means that even if you're going to tell me that you're not allowed to knead with it after you already made the dough and now it's already kneaded, now you could come and you could put on top of the kneaded dough. Now you could put oil, or you could put wine, or you could put dvash. Not inside. That's what he says. That means you're not allowed to knead with it. Mekatfim bo. Mekatfim bo, it says here, mutal latuach penei isa leachar adichata. You're allowed to smear it on top of it, right, with these liquids. So atan letanakama. So this goes according to Rabbi Tanakama, right? Why? Because the Tanakama said, it's not the words of Rabbi Akiva, it was according to Rabbi Akiva, you're even lashin lechatchila, because that's what he did. The Chachamim say, et shelashim bo mekatfim bo. Et shelashim bo mekatfim bo. Said no. It says the Chachamim, which is very, very logical. They said, listen, whatever you could knead, you could smear. Whatever you don't need, you're not allowed to knead with, you're not allowed to smear it together. Okay? V'shavim, but all the Tanaim agree, that you're not allowed to do it with maim poshrim, which is basically water, which is lukewarm, right? Tepid, right? Which is basically it's not hot, not cold, right? So he says why. Everyone is modim because there it makes it quicken the process of how do you call it?
They use cold water?
Yeah. Cold water, yeah, because it quickens the rising process if you use warm water, right? A lukewarm water, okay? I once actually heard, right? I don't know if this is correct, but I once actually heard that the same thing happens with bacteria. Bacteria, it's either good to use hot water, right? Because the hot water kills the bacteria, or cold water. If you use, room temperature, lukewarm, it's not good. And that's apparently with everything. It's, with cleaning also as well. It's either boiling hot, or like if it's gonna be like like Mickey Mouse, it doesn't work. Quicker.
Helps accelerate
The yeast. Okay, very good.
What did you say,
Right.
sugar?
Sugar, yeah, he said sugar. That's what he said about the juices. Fine. So says the Gemara, Lakashia, it's not a question. Habi Yom Tov Rishon, Habi Yom Tov Sheni, which means the first Braita that says that we're talking about the first night of Pesach, that it's a chovah to eat lechem oni, right? That's when Rabbi Akiva says you're not going to be chovah with matzah shira. But the second Braita, we're talking about the rest of the days of Pesach. So the rest of the days of Pesach, you could eat matzah shira, and there's no problem. Just like Yeshua ben Levi told his children, Yom HaKama, the first day of Pesach, lo talushli bichalva. Do not knead it with milk. Yeah, but mikam ve'elach, but the rest you could do it with halal.
For us, the first 2 days.
Right, obviously, because we live in the diaspora and we're doing 2 days like one day. So the Gemara is going to ask a very famous question. Are you allowed to make milky bread?
If it looks like a normal bread, you can't.
Exactly. If it looks like a normal bread, you can't. So says the Gemara, Vatanya, 1 second. I thought we said en lashin et isa bechalav. Right? Vimlash, kol patasura min neregalavara. There's another Braita. The Braita says you're not allowed to knead something with milk. We spoke about that a few days ago. Right? Exactly. So he said that if right now you're not allowed to come and you're not allowed to knead with milk, how could he come and he tell his children, listen. The first day of Pesach, don't knead with milk. But the rest you could. Why? You're not allowed to make anything with milk. Right? Why? Because of Ergelavera. People are going to come. They're going to eat it afterwards with meat. Yeah? So Ella Haki Kama. This is what it means. Yoma Kama lo talush b'divusha. Don't do it with honey. Then afterwards do it with honey. By Tamar, if you want, you can answer another answer. Lulam b'chalav, but really we were talking about chalav. We're talking about the milk. Kedam Ravina, just like Ravina says, Ke'en Torah Shari, that if you make, right, if you're going to make it like the ayin of a shor, right, that's what it says here. So therefore, what happens is that he says, then you're allowed to. Achanami Ken Torah, which means if you're going to do an action in it, that you're going to make like a very, very small, whether it's,
the size of a $50.
Yeah, something that they know, that they see it, and they see that it's weird. You understand? It means you're not allowed to make challah rolls, which are milky. Because you make challah rolls, which are milky, everyone's going to think it's a part of it, and all of a sudden they're going to start eating it, and they eat it with their nice, with their liver and this and that, and all of a sudden they're eating basar v'chalav. You understand? But if it's something so small and they could it's recognizable that it's weird, it's not normal. You understand? It's not the normal. Then they could make it chalavi.
You have to make it look really different.
You have to make it look different. That's what we're saying. Okay, that's what it says over here. Well, obviously, I'm saying obviously the oven, but that's a technical issue. Let's say you have milky ovens, whatever it is. They had that. I remember. I remember they asked me.
In the old country, they had one oven, Rabbi. For goodness' sake.
Okay, fine.
It didn't spill over.
Fine. I remember that they had this question. They called me up. It was a few years ago. It was a mashgiach. They called me up. I don't remember if it was in tapas or if it was in the other that they wanted to make like a milky bread. I think it was in tapas because tapas is milky also, correct? Yeah. It's milky in parve. So I think it was in tapas, and they wanted to make a milky bread. And I remember it was a big question because they can't make a regular milky bread. It had to be something special. Like it had to look in a different form that people would understand. You understand? Fine. So says the Gemara, right? So they come and they say that everyone agrees that you're not allowed to come and you're not allowed to knead the Yisa with poshin. What's the difference between menachot, right? That it says that, again, by menachot is a meal offering, right? The meal offering also comes from matzah. It doesn't come from chametz. Now, there we do need it with mayim poshrim. So what's going on? Meaning certain sacrifices were done with matzah. Very few were done with chametz. Which ones were done with chametz? We already mentioned Shavuot, right? The Shtei Alechem on Shavuot.
40 loaves and
very good. So the Korban Todah, the Thanksgiving offering, had 40 loaves. 30 were?
30 were regular matzah.
And 10 were chametz. Okay, so there were very few which were done chametz. Now here, we're using matzah. What's I'm talking about? No. This is Korban Todah. You brought a Thanksgiving offering. You wanted to say a gomel. You come, you say, you bring a Korban Todah, and this is your obligation, yeah? So it says here, so what's the difference between menachot? Menachot, you're not allowed to bring it as chametz, but there you do use the mayim poshrim, the lukewarm water. The Tananos, we learned to the Mishnah, kol menachot nilosho beposhrin. We just watched over that it's not going to become chametz. So answers the Gemara, imamru bizrizim. When do we say that? Only by the kohanim that there is rizim. Right? I remember somebody mentioning that. Right? Yomru b'shen zizim, but that you could say by everyone that they're not zizim. Meaning kohanim.
Say with warm water. Why would they do that? What's the purpose of that? I mean, it's gonna speed up the leavening. Better to use cold water.
I don't know. I don't know why. You're asking why would they use it? Let's see here. It says here it's a mitzvah min hamuvchar because it's baked better. That's what it says. It means it's baked better. The problem though is that you have a problem. Now he says you're not allowed to do it with boiling hot water because boiling hot water chultim. Right, and not in cold water because cold water makes choltim it makes it like into a solid right away. Do you know that when you want to make all these types of donuts, right, and you want to keep the shape, what do? They make the shape, they throw it into boiling hot water, they take it out, and then they put it to bake.
Right.
Correct? Yeah, that's called choltim. So that's what you're doing here. Exactly, bagels, donuts, all these types of things. That's what they do. Yeah, because when you put in the hot water, it's like, nowadays the freeze, how do you call them? Which one? The? Blast chiller. Blast chiller, exactly. Blast chiller, that's what it is. Yeah, that's basically, you put it inside, it does the exact same thing. You're throwing it in hot water, boom, it's too much for it. So now if you do it in cold water, it says here it's rochim, which means that it makes it bad. So because of that, it was better to do it with mayim poshrim, but you had a technical issue. It's going to become chametz. So he says kohanim are zizim. Since kohanim, they're very, very quick. Yeah, kohanim, they're always the first ones in tefillah. They're always, running. They're always, you understand? So, right, he says over here, yeah, so he says, so since the kohanim are zizim, so therefore he comes and he says, think about it. Kohanim always have to be on the run. Did you realize? Right, where we just finished Kiddusha, they have to start running. They run to the back, wash their hands, run back. If not, the Sheikh Tzibur already finished Hamidan, they're still there. You understand? They always have to be running. They have to be zrizim. So because of that, he comes and he says, right? We have to work out, exactly. So he says over here, so because of that, right? Why do you think that the age of the Kohanim had to be, the certain age? You understand? After, that's it. The retirement wasn't at 65. It doesn't exist. Retirement was much earlier. Yeah, so he says over here, if so, now what happens? By Pesach, it's given to everybody, so not everyone's zizim. So now says the Gemara, if so, miltat nami latit. So he says, what? Why don't you put also the chitim? Which means, why don't we put the chitim also there, right? Instead of the solenikia, in the water, right? The kernels, right? And we're not going to suspect, but since they're Kohanim are going to be very, very quick. So Alama Amar Bizeh, so why did Rabbi Zira come and said the name of Rabbi and the name of Shmuel? You're not allowed to do it with the kernels. So says the Gemara, Lisha bizrizin ita letita leta bizrizin. Meaning when you're kneading, you could do it very, very quickly. And that's where the Kohanim are very, very quick. But letita, which is, how do you say in English? Soaking. The soaking, right, through the Kohanim, that they're not that quick.
The Kohanim don't do the soaking. Other people do it.
Exactly. So therefore, that's why we don't. Meaning the other part, the part which is the Kohanim, that we say is rizim. But the other part, which is not done by the Kohanim, no, that we don't say the zizim. So the Gemara says, "V'lisha mitim zizim." What? And the lisha has to be done dafka by Kohanim. Has to be done specifically by Kohanim. I can't do the lisha. I can't knead it together. The active it's written. V'yatzak alei shemen. Right? V'yaviyah ela kohen menei Aaron Kohanim v'kamat shekmitza ve'elach mitza kuna. Only from the kmitza onwards. Remember, the kmitza was afterwards when I come and I put my fingers like this. Remember, I will do this. That's a kmitza. So that has to be done onwards. The Kohanim. But beforehand, it could have been done by me.
Good question.
Right? So it comes out that a yitzika, which is basically pouring the shemen, the oil, into the kemach, right? Or the belila, which is actually mixing the kemach and everything. So that's all kosher by everyone. So therefore, what are you telling me? So the Gemara answers, Lisha nehidav, even though you're right. Right? By the lisha, there's no zrizin, bimkom zrizinita. Right? It's in a place of, right? That means even though it's kosher by a zar, it still has to be done in the Bet HaMikdash. Right, which there the Kohanim are there. So since the Kohanim are there, they teach the people to be very, very quick. Which means you can't do the kneading at home and bring it to the Bet HaMikdash. It has to be in the Bet HaMikdash area. Since it's done in the Bet HaMikdash area, the Kohanim are there. They're going to say, "Hey, what are you doing? You have to, what's going on here?" You understand? So because of that, they have to be very, very quick. The Amar More says, "Belila is keshira bazar." It's true that the mixing and everything is kosher in azar. Chutz lechomat azara pasula. But if it's done outside of the walls of the azara, it's going to be pasul. But it has to be inside the azara. Inside of the Bet HaMikdash. La'puke letita, which comes to exclude letita, right, which is the soaking, because it's not done by the Kohanim, and it's not even done in the place of the Kohanim. So for the letita, the soaking could be done anywhere. And because of that, we don't let that. So my shnami minchat ha'omer. So ask the Gemara, what's the difference between the regular mincha and minchat ha'omer? Regular mincha is the regular meal offering. And then you have the minchat ha'omer. What's a minchat ha'omer? Of the korban ha'omer, which is brought on the 16th of how do you call it? Of Nisan.
Towards Shavuos from Pesach.
Yeah. So he says over here. So what is it? So he says it's was learned to the right. You do the letita. You do soak it, and then you come and tzovrinota, which means that you come and you put it into a pile in order that all the water will come out, right? So therefore, there we did permit the letita. We did permit the soaking. So answers the Gemara, tzibur shane. No, that's a korban tzibur. Since it's a korban tzibur, so the betin are the ones that are taking care of the entire thing, and therefore there's a rizim. It's not like an individual sacrifice that each person does their own thing. Because if it's each person does their own thing, they're not going to be quick in it. So therefore, we don't permit it. Okay? Next, we learned in the Braita. A person is going to be yotze chova with bikurim, right? Which means a kohen that they brought him chitim, which is bikurim, which are the first fruit. He could come make matzah, and he's going to be yotze chova with bikurim. Tamulomar. So is he going to be yotze chova? Tamulomar comes to teach you. What does it mean in all your dwelling places you could eat matzot? It has to be matzah which is eaten in all your dwelling places. You're going to be zechova. So bikurim now bikurim could only be eaten in Yerushalayim. So since it could only be eaten in Yerushalayim, according to Rabbi Yosef Grelea, again, what happens? You're not yotzei chova with matzah of bikurim, because since it's written bechol mashotechem, it has to be eaten anywhere. Bikurim could only be written in Yerushalayim. So since bikurim could only be eaten in Yerushalayim, you're not yotzei chova with a matzah that you made from bikurim. Rabbi Akiva again argues, and he says, no, matzah umaror. Right? 1 second. I'm going to make another thing. It says al matzot umrurim, matzah umaror, ma maror, just like maror, she'eno bikurim. Maror is not bikurim, which means that there's no yirakot, which are going to be right from the. Remember, you're only going to be yotzei chova the maror, not from the 7 species of the bikurim. Bikurim is only from the 7 species of Eretz Yisrael. Okay. That's what it says here. The 7 species, which is the wheat, barley, the grapes, figs, pomegranates, olives, and dates. So it says over here, those are the 7 species of Israel, right? But it says from your land. So therefore, since it comes from your land, it's only the species that come from your land. So maror cannot be of any of these 7 species. So therefore, just like the maror cannot be of any 7 species, af matzah sheno bikurim, so to the matzah cannot be from the bikurim. So Rabbi Akiva says, that means basically they both agree, but it's just a different reason to agree. Right? That means they're arguing on the reason, but they both agree that you're not going to chovah with bikurim. Okay, matzav bikurim. The first opinion said because bikurim are only in Yerushalayim, and here it says you should eat it wherever you are. The second opinion is because nothing to do with Yerushalayim, it had to do with maror. Matzot u'mororim. It's written both of them juxtaposed together, so therefore ekesh. I learned them both together. So what is just like the maror cannot be from the 7 species, so too the matzah cannot be from this bikurim. So says the Gemara. Ima maror shem memino bikurim, av matzah shem memina bikurim. He says, 1 second. But if you're going to tell me from maror never has the same species as bikurim. But matzah, you're going to tell me it doesn't have the same species as bikurim, right? Lamed Vav Amud Bet 36b. Otzi chitinu seorin shesh b'minam bikurim. Right. So 1 second. What about chitinu seorin? Wheat and barley you do have from matzah, and you do have from bikurim as well. So what's going on then? Tamulomar matzot riba. So the matzot, the extra time that it's written matzot, is coming to include that you're allowed to make matzah out of wheat and barley, right? You're allowed to make matzah out of wheat and barley, right? And the hekesh is only coming to exclude bikurim mamash, but not the actual wheat and barley. Because remember, if I'm going to learn this learning on matzot u'merurim, and I'm going to say that it just like maror cannot come from bikurim, matzah cannot come from bikurim, that means you're not allowed to make from wheat and barley matzah. So because of that, he had to come in and add in the words matzot to include wheat and barley, that you're allowed to use wheat and barley for the matzah.
What did we learn earlier by matzot? We learned it earlier in our this year.
We learned it earlier that according to matzot, he wanted to add in the maaser,
rich man's
the rich man's matzah.
I don't really get it, but I don't have to. It's Daf Yomi. I'll look it over later.
Okay. Says the Gemara.
Why not include bikurim?
Yeah. So now he comes and he says like this. Yeah. He comes and he says. Just learned it. Where was it? Here it is.
Could have even been the end of the other one, Rabbi. It's not important.
Yeah, it was probably the previous one. Okay, fine. So now it says the Gemara. Yeah. Afilu bikurim nami. Okay, fine. So matzot. If you're going to tell me now it's matzot riba, so then even bikurim then. Because why are you only telling me that it's only coming to include the wheat and barley, include all the bikurim? So says the Gemara, Hadaber Rabbi Akiva actually retracted from that ekesh of matzot u'merurim yichlu. And what does he say? The time was learned to the Braita. Yachol yitzed bikurim. I thought you could be yitzed bikurim. Tamul ma mechot shvotechem techlu matzot. Matzah nechele bechol mashavot. Yitza bikurim shenechele bechol mashavot b'Yerushalayim. So basically, we bring down this first shita, which is basically that bechol mashvotechem, right, tochlu matzot, which was the like Rabbi Yosef Gileh. That means, how do we know that you're not going to say chovah with bikurim? Because since it says bechol mashvotechem, bikurim is not eaten in bechol shvotechem. Bikurim is only eaten in Jerusalem and Yerushalayim. So yachol, I would have thought the same, right? Shani motzi et maaser af maaser sheni, that I'm going to come in to exclude maaser sheni. Tamul lomar matzot riba, right? It's coming to include matzot. That's where we learned it from, right? The matzot by maaser sheni, right? Umar ra'ita lerabo maaser sheni ulotzi bikurim. So the Gemara is going to ask, why is it that you're going to include maaser sheni and to exclude bikurim? Maybe do the other way around. So says the Gemara, no. I want to include Masechet because it's eaten everywhere. Like just like Rabbi Elazar that he's going to say now. But I'm going to exclude bikurim that it doesn't have ayater everywhere. Says Rabbi Elazar. How do you know the Masechet Sheni that becomes tameh, that you could redeem it even in Yerushalayim? It says in the pasuk, right, that you can't carry it. What does it mean? Now se'et means to eat. Okay, so therefore, since the se'et here it says here, pshuto shel lashon se'eto is lashon masa, carrying. That's why I translated it right away. Lo tuchal se'eto.
That is also se'et v'sapachat.
Right, se'et v'sapachat. Yes, but that's to do with the. That's not the same shortish here. Here it's lashon masa. So here right? Like for example, right, when you're carrying, it says that the gadol avono mineso, right, from carrying. So here it's right. It's also the same thing. Se'et over here, right? Vayisa masat met panav, or all these masot is all talking about carrying, right? But however, though, sometimes also the word se'et can mean eating. It says in the pasuk that we just read actually that Yosef was with a seudah with his brothers. It says vayisa masot met panav, and they carry masot met panav, which means they're food, right? So therefore it says so too. When it says here lo tuchal se'eto, it means they couldn't eat it. Not that they couldn't carry it, they couldn't eat it. So man shamale the maaser sheni, right? The amar maaser sheni nafikbe. Who's the one that says that you could be yitzchak chovah with maaser sheni? It's only Rabbi Akiva. V'kamemai leu. So how do we say bikurim no? From michol b'shotechem shmamina hadarbe, which means like this. This what did we just say? We just answered. We just said that if you learn matzot, what did the Gemara say? We come to include chita v'seora. Chita v'seora means you can make matzah out of wheat and barley, but it was already excluded the bikurim. Yeah, so bikurim is excluded and the wheat and barley is included. We ask why, right? Why don't you just include everything? So the Gemara says you're right. Rabbi Akiva retracted. What do you mean he retracted? On this learning of matzot u'morim, he retracted. He held like Rabbi Yosef Galilei that bikurim you learn from b'chol mashotechem. Why? We taught on right that b'chol mashotechem. Then the Gemara asks, if you're going to tell me b'chol mashotechem, what about maaser sheni? So the Gemara answers by maaser sheni. You're right. By maaser sheni, the entire concept of maaser sheni, right? We preferred to include maaser sheni because of matzot. Who was the one that said that? Rabbi Akiva. So for this is Rabbi Akiva that he retracted because he holds like Rabbi Yosef Galilei to do with bikurim. Okay. Now, why do we include maaser sheni and not bikurim? Because maaser sheni could be eaten anywhere.
I didn't know that maaser sheni that got temei when you were inside Jerusalem that you could redeem it and eat it anywhere. I did
Okay, but that's what it's written here. Yeah. Fine. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yosef Galilei, according to Rabbi Yosef Galilei, tepuk lei. Why did he have to learn the bikurim is from b'chol mashotechem? Why doesn't he learn it from lechemoni? Mi shechal beoni aninut yatza zeh shechal b'simcha. Bikurim is just like, right, the what? That bikurim also has to be eaten b'simcha, just like maaser sheni, which means that a kohen cannot eat bikurim when he's in aninut. So therefore, learn the same thing. Why do you need an extra learning? If I'm going to ask you now, why according to Rabbi Yosef Galilei you cannot have maaser sheni as matzah? So he doesn't know like Rabbi Akiva, matzot riba. He learns why not? Aninut, lechem oni. You have to eat it with simcha, not with aninut. So you cannot eat it. So 1 second, do the same thing with bikurim. Bikurim has to be eaten with simcha, cannot be eaten with aninut. So the same thing. When I'm going to ask you, why can't you have matzah of bikurim? You should answer me just like you answered by maaser sheni, lechem oni. And oni, even though it's written with an ayin, it means aninut, which means that, like a person that he's suffering, right? So you're not allowed to eat it. So therefore, same thing here. So answers the Gemara, Sabala Rabbi Shimon, Hilza Rabbi Shimon. The time we learned on the Braita, bikurim asurim leonen. Bikurim is a sur for onen, but Rabbi Shimon permits it for an onen. Right? So therefore, it comes out that since Rabbi Yosef Galilei holds like Rabbi Shimon, Be'emet it's permitted for onen. That's why he needed a different pasuk to prohibit it, which is b'chol mashotechem, because he couldn't learn it from the aninut of lechem oni. Okay, my tamad Rabbanan. What's the reasoning of Rabbanan that they say that bikurim is a sur for an onen? It says in the pasuk, you're not allowed to eat it in your gates. More and more says trumat yadecha. These are the bikurim. They eat kash bikurim maaser, so there's a kesh of bikurim to maaser. So maaser sheni, just like maaser sheni, you're not allowed in an onen. So to bikurim is a sur be'onen. Rabbi Shimon, and according to Shimon, truma karyur rachamana. The Torah called it trumat yadecha. Ki truma, it's like truma. Just like truma is mutar for an onen, so to bikurim is mutar for an onen. Meaning an onen is allowed to eat truma, right? That he's allowed to eat. He's not allowed to eat maaser sheni. He's not allowed to eat bikurim, but he's allowed to eat truma. So since the Torah called it truma, even though if you're going to tell me that it was compared to that bikurim were compared to truma, so just like truma you're allowed to eat, so to bikurim
you don't have to be happy to eat it, right?
Exactly, that's what you just said. Yes. Rabbi Shimon, according to Rabbi Shimon, truma. Oh, sorry, I just read that. Rabbi Shimon nehi dehekesh letle, even though he doesn't hold of this hekesh from bikurim to maaser sheni. Simcha miya michtav k'tiva, but it's written simcha. Tichtiv v'samachta b'chol hatov. You're going to be happy. So that means how could you eat it if the person's going to be in aninut? He has to be happy when he's eating bikurim. It says mefurash v'samachta. So answers the Gemara, hahu lizman simcha udata. There, it's not that it's in your spiritual state. It's in the time of the simcha. The time was learned to the Mishnah. From Shavuot until Sukkot, you're going to bring Bikurim and you're going to read the Psukim on them. From Chag until Chanukah, from Sukkot until Chanukah, you're allowed to bring Bikurim, but you don't read it anymore. You don't read the Psukim. Why? Because it's not a Zman of Simcha. That means basically the time of the Simcha was from Shavuot until Sukkot. That was the time of Simcha. So that's when you're going to bring it and you're going to read it. Afterwards, it's not. So when it says V'samachta, it doesn't mean on your state of being, because if a person's anonen, he's not in a state of being of happy, but it's actually on the time frame. Okay? So it says the Gemara Tanu Rabbanan, we learned in a Braita, lechem oni prat lechalut. When it says lechem oni, this comes to exclude chalut. Chalut, again, if you remember that you took the bread and you threw it into the boiling hot water. Vela ashisha, or a matzah gedola v'chashuva, something very, very important. Right? But it's not lechem oni again. So yachol lo yetze lechovato ela bepat hadra.
Ashisha is a big loaf.
Yeah, a big one, an important one. So obviously it's not lechem oni. So I would have thought to say that you're not going to say chovah ela bepat hadra, which is pat kibar, which is basically it's like the leftover flour. That means the flour that there's still bran and everything inside of it. That means it's not something good at all. Tamulomar matzot riba. Right? Vafilu ke matzot shel Shlomo, even if it's going to be matzot of Shlomo Melech. Right? That means basically it's going to be like a very pure flour. That means the flour that you could use could be 100% pure. It doesn't have to be like the coarse flour, like like secondhand or like the bad flour. It could be very, very good flour. In Ken, if so, what does it come to teach you? Lechemoni. Shisha comes to exclude if it's going to be thrown into the hot boiling water or a big huge matzah. How do you know that ashisha means a very chashuv, right, bread, meaning like a very chashuv matzah? So he says, it says in the pasuk, they divided for all the nation, for all the people of Yisrael, whether it's man or women, for a man a chalat lechem achat, ve'eshpar echad, and one eshpar v'ashisha achat, and one ashisha. The Amar of Chanan Barabba says, what is eshpar? Eshpar is a notrikon, it's an acronym for echad mishisha bepar, which is a very big piece of a meat, right? Which is basically 1/6 of a full bull. So imagine you have a par, you have a bull, 1/6 of the bull they gave to every single man or woman. Vashisha and notrikon again is going to be an acronym for echad mishisha be'efa, for 1/6 of an efa. Now an efa is a very, very big. How do you call it? Very
6
big
to
bread.
7, 8 pounds of flour.
Yeah, that's a huge amount. You know what that is? Imagine nowadays the flour that they have, right? The flour that we have is a 5-pound bag, right? We're not talking about the 50 pounds of the restaurants, right? Or the catering. We're talking about a 5-pound flour, right? So that's 5 pounds. Now how many chalot you make from there, right? Here we're talking about a matzah that you made from this flour. So imagine what type of matzah you made. You know what I'm saying? A big amount. So it says here, this argues on Shmuel. Shmuel says Ashisha is garba de chamra. It has nothing to do with the matzah. That means it's nothing to do with the size of the bread or anything like that. Nothing to flour, nothing. He says, what is Ashisha? Garba de chamra. It's a jug of wine. It says in Pasuk, the people that love to drink the wine. So if you see from here that the Shishei Anavim are utensils of wine. So it has nothing to do with it. So obviously this argues on Shmuel. Okay, and then we're going to just going to start. We're going to Braita. You're not allowed to make very thick bread on Pesach. These are the words of Bet Shammai. Bet Hillel says it's going to be permitted, and what is patava, and then we're going to go into Bezrat Hashem tomorrow. Have a wonderful day.